In this video we want to talk about policy chaining, which is the ability to call one policy from another. And so if you go to Google and look for BizTalk 2006 Policy Chaining SDK, you'll find an MSDN page here. And let's click that. And so they actually have some SDKs that are really not included with the normal SDK. And so on this page, look for the word chain or chaining. And so here's two different ones, and we're going to look at both of these. So there's policy chaining and inserting XML nodes from business rules. So let's save these to disk. And I'll stick them in My Documents. And we'll go ahead and run the first one. And it's going to put it on your disk in an unzipped folder. So let's call this BizTalk SDK unzip. And we'll go ahead and download the second one, but we'll wait and install it later. So now, if we go to our disk and go to what I call it, BT. Okay, here's the file, BT SDK unzip, and I should go ahead and add to that, I guess, policy chaining. And then I open that. This is basically the SDK. So let's copy this now to our regular SDK so that we won't have it in a strange place on our disk. So we're going to go back to Program Files, Microsoft, BizTalk, and then go to the SDK there, and then go to Samples, Business Rules, and then paste it right here. Okay, so here's the policy chaining sample they give us, and let's open the solution and look at it. Again, this is mostly C# code, not BizTalk related code per se. So actually the actual code is going to be in a subproject here called Policy Executor Lib. So here you see Poly Executor Lib and Policy Client. So if you go to Policy Executor, you'll see the sample code that we're going to use. Let's just read their little summary. Contains methods that wrap the execute method of the policy class exposed to the rule engine. There are mainly two execute methods. One is an instance method and the other is a static method. And if we scroll down here, we can see public class policy executor. And then we have policy executor, and you notice it's receiving a typed XML document being passed to it. And that's the constructor. Okay, then, so we have what it said, the static and the non-static. So this would be the non-static. We pass a policy name, and it's going to call that policy with the same typed XML document that we passed up here, which is stored in TXT. So where is TXT defined? If I come here and right click, go to definition, it's at the very bottom, which seems kind of backwards. So here is a private variable called TXT, which is typed XML document. Now I usually use the static version here, public static void execute. You pass the policy name and the document on the same execute statement. And then what it's going to do is, in this case, it's going to use something called the tracking interceptor, which is basically the debugger that you've seen used before. And it's going to create a new policy. It's going to insert 3 facts into that policy. One of them is the document that you pass to it, which is the typed XML document. The second one is new policy process loan request. Okay, so what they're doing here, I think, is hard coding a specific policy, which is not that great an idea. And then here they're taking the tracking interceptor itself and putting that in there. And then they're going to execute that and then dispose of it. So I'm going to show you sort of a sanitized version of this that I used. And what we're going to do is we're going to go put it in my common library. So here's my common library. So we're in the BRE helpers class. And I'm still going to leave it in the same class, but I'm going to I'm going to have two classes here within the same CSS file. So even though this is called BRE helpers, I'm going to keep their original name here, which was called policy executor. Okay, and then the changes I've made, let me show you. So here's the static void. You notice here I've commented out several of these facts. So I've basically changed this now that I'm only going to pass one fact, and that fact is going to be the TXD, the typed XML document. Everything else is superfluous. Now this exists in case you want to do debugging, and maybe we need to have an optional flag here that says comma debug is true or false, and then we could put the debugger on if we wanted to. That would probably be a better idea. First, let me just show you what it does. And then I kept their original here. I called it execute original sample, and this is what they gave us in the SDK that we just downloaded. But this is the one I'm going to use in my programs. So I'm going to do a rebuild solution here, and it succeeded. So now we're going to have to put that in the GAC. So here's my common library. Drag and drop it into the GAC, and let's get rid of this, and let's go open a new BizTalk Composer now. Now, we're going to add an entirely new policy, and we're going to call it master policy. So the question you probably should be asking is, why do we care? Why do we need to call a policy from a policy? Well, for instance, the last place I worked, we had what we called an entry point or a master policy. And then depending upon the XML that we received, we then chose to call other policies. So we had a common XML header which had kind of like a command in it that says if the command is this, then go run the loan policy. But if the command is this, go run the customer policy. But if the command is this, go run the employee policy or something like that. So here we're going to add a new rule, and let's call this the call loan policy. And right now we don't really have any other XML to deal with, so we're going to have to do one of those 1 = 1 rules up here. So we're going to say equals 1 = 1, so that would always execute. And then down here in the actions, we're going to use our new C# code that we just deployed. So we're going to go here, browse, and add the BizTalk Common Library, BizTalk Training Common Library. So here we have BRE helpers, and now you see policy executor. So under the policy executor, we want to find the static method that we pass the policy name and the typed XML document, which is, it's not the original one, it's this one. And you drag it down here under actions. And then the policy name, you would come up here and you would put in loan processing. And then this would assume then that we're using the exact same document. So again, the place where I was working before, we developed an enterprise service bus, and so we had a super common message, a canonical message that everybody in the system had to use, and we passed that same message among all our different business rules, which made it very easy and useful for the business rules. I mean, there were maybe other issues with it, but for business rules it worked out very well. And so right here I'm going to have to pass a loan document to that. So I'm going to have to go back to the loan example we were using before, which is always kind of trouble to find it here. So we're going to go to that directory and then go to loan processing and pick the case schema. And as we did before, you're going to drag not the root but the XSD itself over onto this typed document. So basically what this says is if I call the master policy from an orchestration and I pass it a loan document, I want to take that loan document now and pass it to the loan processing policy. And then so this basically this policy is going to execute this policy via C#. So right here we're calling a C# static method, which in turn is going to reinvoke the business rule engine again, and pass control to the loan processing rule or policy, but passing the same message there. So to try to make this realistic and understandable, I'm going to have to create another schema and another orchestration. So this is like the intro, and then we'll do that orchestration schema and test in the next video.